today I have the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing Washington, D.C.'s, well, I shouldn't say new, because she's been on the job for a while, but Washington, D.C.'s chief of police.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is indeed an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure for me to be here with you guys today to talk about a couple of things. When you come into the Rotary Club, what are we going to talk about, right? We can talk about a lot of things, but I think it's important that we talk about Washington, D.C. and the state of our city and where we are and the things that I think are important to a lot of people. I think it's important to talk about where we are, but more importantly, where we're going as a city. I think those things are important. I think it's important to talk about the threat landscape because that impacts everyone in this room. And then lastly, how can you help? Because I believe that when you talk about crime fighting, when you talk about safe cities, that's not a spectator sport. Everybody can be involved in that space. So I really want to highlight, I know I got about 20 minutes, and while I do from time to time hang out with Baptist preachers, I won't be before you long. The last time, Kenny, actually, I was in this club, I was having drinks at the bar with a Catholic priest downstairs, man. So that was quite some time ago, but I promise I won't be before you long. So where are we when we talk about crime and we talk about crime in Washington, D.C.? I know we hear the news and what's going on. We had this incident, we had that incident. Right now in Washington, D.C., there is about, and when we talk about violent crime specifically, there's about a 1% increase in violent crime. There's a slight uptick there. The big uptick, or the uptick that's concerning to most people, is the uptick in homicides in our city. And that's about a 12% uptick. It's about 21 cases more than what we had last year. Now, when I talk about homicides in any community, I will oftentimes tell people, whether it's 2 or 200, they're all equally important to me, right? Especially if one of those 200 happen to be your son, your daughter, or it happened in the block where you live, where your business is, and you're impacted by a homicide or some type of violent crime that happened in our city. So on the violent crime front, we're up slightly where we were this time last year. When you look at the shootings we hear about the shootings that happen in the city, we're actually about 100 shootings or 100 less people shot in our city this year than we had at the same time last year. You can believe that, right? If you watch the news, and any one is a bad one. But when you talk about what we're actually doing, what we're seeing, again, slight uptick in crime. Our department size, I think this is important for community members or business members to know. The Metropolitan Police Department we're at a point right now where our force size, we're a little less than where we were this time last year, about 200 less officers than where we were this time last year. What does that mean for you? What does that mean for me? It simply means this: we're in a city where the population continues to increase. Over 712,000 residents in our beautiful city, right? We're talking about a slight uptick in crime, but we're talking about the number of police officers has gone down over the course of the last year. The men and women in the Metropolitan Police Department responds to over 600,000 calls for service every year, if you can believe that. That's a significant amount of calls for service for a city our size. Not taking into consideration that last year when COVID was really in play, it is now, but when it was really in play, businesses were shuttered and we didn't have people visiting our city, those numbers and calls for service, because the people are starting to come back in our city, continue to increase, but we have a shrinking workforce in the Metropolitan Police Department. The other thing that's important about where we are right now is the change culture that exists in law enforcement agencies all around the country. You hear it in the form of defund the police. You hear it in the form of this matter, that matter. And all those things, while they are important, they impact law enforcement and, quite frankly, how law enforcement does its job. And that, quite frankly, it really informs what you see the police department doing in the communities where we're serving day in and day out. Those are the things that are happening right now. I like to talk about where we're going. The Metropolitan Police Department, and I have given them this charge, we have a motto, and that motto is that excellence is transferable. And when I say excellence is transferable, that means excellence is transferable in any and everything that we do as the Metropolitan Police Department. Whether we're fighting crime, serving communities, serving the underserved communities, children in our communities, the seasoned citizens in our community, whatever it is we happen to be doing, we want to do it in the spirit of excellence. And in doing so, I believe that Washington, D.C. should, without a doubt, be the safest city in America. Quite frankly, I believe that. I believe that in my heart. I believe that in terms of what I see every day, day in and day out, and the people who are committed to doing that. So I believe that we should be the safest city in America, and that's where I'm pushing the Metropolitan Police Department toward. How do we get there? Intelligence-led efforts and strategies that support us being the safest city in America are all important to have in place. How do we do that? Well, we do that by making sure that we pull on some of the best practices that you see in law enforcement really across the country. And we take that national perspective, really an international perspective, in terms of how law enforcement officers do their job, where they are, in their respective spaces and places, who's doing it the best. And we want to be better than the group that's doing it the best wherever they happen to be. I believe that. As we take this intelligence-led effort, that there's other components to this that are critically important. It's the whole of government approach, and it's the whole of community approach that are all part of the same ecosystem that has to be in sync in order for us to really see safer communities, safer for where you live, safer for where you work, safer for you just to be out in front of the university club, quite frankly. But it's the whole of government, whole of community approach. And what does that mean? That simply means this. It's not all law enforcement all the time that is going to be the resolve for some of the issues that we see in community. When you talk about underserved communities and you talk about communities that have challenges that go far beyond the capacity of law enforcement to deal with, who are those others in government and community that has capacity to address some of the needs? When you talk about food deserts in some communities, I don't walk around with groceries. I really don't. I don't walk around with a bag of jobs. I don't walk around with housing. I have handcuffs, I have a firearm, and I have a phone. My cell phone is probably the most important tool that I carry on my belt, simply because it allows me to connect people to services. It allows me to connect people to other entities that may be helpful to them outside of a law enforcement response. But I also know that when people want the police, they want the police. And we have a response in that space too. So making sure that the government ecosystem, that the law enforcement ecosystem, that those things are really the judicial ecosystem, that those things are really all working together towards a safer Washington, D.C. are very important to me. I hope it's very important to you. And I know it's on the minds of thousands and thousands of citizens that I've encountered all across our city. The threat landscape. Briefly wanted to talk about the threat landscape and what are those things that are really the things that keep me up at night. People ask me that question all the time. Homegrown violent extremists keep me up at night. That's the guy who, might pull a car up in front of any business, any place, any soft target, and might decide to do damage in that space. It's the 200 or so extreme right-wing individuals who showed up in our city with shields and all kinds of stuff this past Saturday, the Patriot Front, that showed up at our city to march from Virginia to the Capitol. And in some instances, quite frankly, looking for conflict. Those things keep me up at night. It's the gun violence that keeps me up at night. When I have recovered, as the Metropolitan Police Department, we've recovered over 2,100 illegal firearms in our city so far this year. We've surpassed last year already. And I see firearms in the hands of young people. Those things keep me up at night. When I see firearms in the hands of young people who will use them indiscriminately in any community, anywhere, those are the things that keep me up at night. When I think about the fear of crime, not that crime is in your specific community, but the fact that people deal with the fear of crime, of something happening in their community, when they hear about this on TV, when they hear about that on TV, those are things that really keep me up at night. When I think about the social media trends that exist, I'm watching very carefully the national landscape. How many people have seen these smashing grabs that have occurred in California, Chicago, and places like that, where they've infiltrated business districts and gone in and just stolen anything and everything that wasn't nailed down, carloads of people. How many people have seen that? Those things keep me up at night when I think about the spaces and places in Washington, D.C. that we know and feel to be safe. When we go out and during the holiday season and we shop and we drink and we dine, those things keep me up at night, the safety and security of those places. So the threat landscape in our city is real. When you talk about all of these things together, when you talk about people doing something that has the potential to make international news, the threat is real. And I can't lose sight of that as the chief of police. I can't lose sight of that as the law enforcement person in Washington, D.C., who shoulders this rest upon. So those are the things that keep me. How you can help our city, and this is for everyone in this room, any person on the Zoom call. I am a firm believer, as I said at the very top. I think when you talk about public safety in our city, I think that everyone can play a part in public safety, wherever you are. You don't have to live in a community that's underserved. You don't have to have a business that's targeted by, whoever. None of that stuff. Everybody literally can play a role in this. I'll tell you how. When you think about issues that happen in our city or wherever it is you live, people respond differently depending on their proximity to the pain point. People respond differently. As an example, a real minor issue, right? I think that there are a lot of people in our city, unfortunately, that are unhoused. And that's a very sad thing, especially when it's cold outside and the temperatures are dropping and it's raining outside. That saddens me. But do I feel different if a tent showed up in front of where I live or where I work and an unhoused person is now taking up residence in front of my residence? Do I feel differently now? Despite the fact that I might feel empathy for this person's situation, etc., I don't think the resolve to that is to have a tent in front of my business. I don't think the resolve for that is to, is to have my kids having to walk out every morning on the way to school. They got to step over God knows what. So I find that depending on a person's proximity to the pain, the response is often different. Translate that to violent crime. When the gunshots are happening in that community or that community, oh wow, sorry to hear that, man, that's terrible. This happened over there. But when one gunshot goes off in your community or in front of your door, there's a different response to that pain. It's real for us. It's real for us. If something happened in a space where my kid attends school, that's real for me. And it's not the issue just over there or the issue that happened in a different state. It's personal for me. So how do we address this public safety piece collectively? I'll tell you what I'm doing, and I'll open it up for you. One of the things that I hear people oftentimes talk about, they talk about, hey, look, kids in our communities need opportunities. Opportunities are not there. If kids have alternatives, they do other things differently, et cetera. I've expanded our police cadet program here in the nation's capital. I was a police cadet, and we have a program, but we've expanded it a bit. And what does that mean? Young people who are in communities, it doesn't matter where they are in DC, from Ward 3 or Ward 1 all the way up to Ward 8, it doesn't matter. But the initial requirement was that they graduate from a DC high school. Now it's just a requirement that they live in DC. Requirement number one. Requirement number two, that they be at least 17 years of age. I want to start employing these young people from the point that they're in their 12th grade year of high school. I want to put a job opportunity in front of them. I want to employ them early on. Those who are interested in law enforcement, create a space and a place where they can transition from high school into paying employment. You know, I mean, for them, a young person coming out the gate, 17, 18 years of age, making $36,000 a year for a young person, that's pretty good stuff. I didn't make $36,000 a year when I was 17 or 18 years old. I just didn't, right? To give them health benefits, 16, to give them health benefits, and make sure that we give them a pathway to the middle class, because that type of opportunity is life-changing for some young people. Ask me how I know. Because I was that young person who needed an opportunity, who wanted to do something different and be defined by something other than the neighborhood that I came from. And I want to expand this opportunity to the young people, to the young kids in the District of Columbia who want to be part of the change that's happening in our city, who want to be part of law enforcement, who decide that they want to help people in this particular way. Now, I'm sure that there are many career fields that are represented here, but the challenge would be, what are we doing in our respective spaces? What are we doing? What opportunities are we making available for internships? How are we teaching and reaching young people that are outside of our comfort zone and talking to them about things like generational wealth? I don't take for granted that those conversations happen in every household, because quite frankly, they don't. But there are young people whose lives can be changed and influenced by knowledge and capacity that's in this room. Things that you can share that may be life-changing for someone. Just something simple, right? Something simple as information. Something simple as a connection to somebody who's a connection to somebody. So I attended George Washington University, and I graduated from there and all that good stuff. Got my degree. That's great, but it didn't start out that way. It didn't start out that way because my parents really didn't have the educational background to guide me that way from high school into GW University. It didn't start out that way. But the moment the opportunity presented itself, the moment somebody invested in me, it made all the difference in the world. And yet, here I stand now as the chief of police of the nation's capital police department. So your input, your influence, the influence that you possess, certainly can make a difference in neighborhoods beyond those where you live, that ultimately will pay dividends, because our city will be safer as a result of what we all do. It doesn't have to just be law enforcement. If you have a church that you're associated with, a synagogue that you're associated with, I had a similar conversations with pastors and rabbis. What are we doing beyond the walls of our houses of worship to impact communities? What are we doing in that space? It's great for the young people that are sitting there present in front of them as they deliver their message weeks in and weeks out. That's great. But I don't think those young people are the ones that are making our cities unsafe, to be quite frank with you. We have to take the message and the message about safety and security beyond the walls that we're comfortable navigating. And sometimes, just sometimes, it might cause us to be a little bit uneasy because we don't normally interact in this space. Like, oh, I'm an IT guy, public safety is not my thing. Well, it's not your thing until you get robbed. So, if we can all participate in some way, shape, form, or fashion to make our city safer, to make an investment of the things that we've learned over the years, for some of us, knowledge that has been passed down from generation to generation to generation. Knowledge about how you make money work for you, as opposed to you working for the money. Being able to tap into some of these young minds that are out there, it will pay incredible dividends and ultimately make our city safe. I want to thank you guys for listening. I want to thank Mr. Barnes for inviting me out today. This is a wonderful group. I really appreciate you guys just hearing what it is I have to say. And hopefully you walk away from this. My ask is that you walk away from this, perhaps maybe with one thing that you might think about differently, or one thing that you might do differently. I'm a firm believer in advocating people or advocating people to action, right? And how do you do that? Part of that doing is understanding kind of what's going on, staying plugged into what's happening in our city. And when you are plugged into what's happening in our city, because I care about it, I know you care about it, you then can become activated to advocacy, right? Advocated or activated to action, right? So when city council or other entities begin to make moves and do things that don't line up with things that make our city safer, it puts you in a position to be able to move and do something, or more importantly, just say something. And it doesn't have to wait, and we don't have to wait until there's a crisis in our city. We don't have to wait for any of that kind of stuff. You can do things now in the spaces and places where you are. So again, I thank you for your time. I think there's some, I'm right at 20 minutes, so I'm gonna open it up for any questions that you guys might have, and hopefully I can help to answer. I'll start.
I was one box cutter stroke away from not being here on the 26th of July, 2021 in the Metro at Petworth, going to Columbia Heights. And the reason I'm saying this is that about 5 of your people came to my rescue before we even landed in Columbia Heights. And the person that perpetrated this was on early release from prison for COVID, was actually being arraigned and being ready to be sent back to prison for and another 30 years tacked on because it was 3 felony accounts. But your people witnessed this in real time, which I don't know how they did that, but then all the videos started working as soon as this happened. And but the whole thing is the optics of this. I've really, most people outside actually in this club, I never even told them about this till just recently, because I take great pride in being in Washington, D.C. It's a fantastic place. I've been in 98 capital cities in the world. This is still the best. And so one of my twin brothers over there, Donnie Shaw. So how do we get to the optics of all of this? You know, and that's part, you know, the soft side of all of this, just like soft power internationally. How do we have soft power within the district itself? One, so that more and more people want to come here and invest in this area. But secondly, to keep us safer. And Kenny Barnes and I have been together in some of the worst areas, and I've done almost a dozen years in Ward 8 and 7 on these. You know, we had 700 people in GED training. But how do we use this soft power and then get the optics right? Because July 6th, January 6th, whether we like it or not, that has tainted this city everywhere in the planet. Everywhere in the planet.
Thank you for being here. Absolutely. So thank you for the question. You know, optics are, I heard that quite a bit during January 6th. That's, you know, I have to bring you back a different time to talk about that, but I certainly will. You know, I was 4 days into the seat when January 6th happened. But that all being said, you know, I think that we have to make sure that whatever we do, that there is a balanced approach to it. I am coming up with and really formalizing and putting things in play that are the law enforcement response to the issues that we see. There are a lot of other players involved in this, and the mayor has made significant investments in violence interrupters and some of these other entities that are supposed to help drive down violent crime. I think at the end of the day, everybody just got to do their jobs in the spaces and places that they have responsibility for. The police need to lock people up. Prosecutors have the responsibility of prosecuting cases. The violence interrupters and some of these other wraparound services, they got to provide those services, and people need to know about those things. And then community members, I think the voices of community members have to be heard in the ears of the people who need to hear it. And that is the political structure of our city, right? So if things are happening, for example, just something real quick, right? So there was a bill that some folks were trying to move forward. And in this particular bill, they wanted to, anytime we stopped a juvenile, or anytime we took evidence from a juvenile without their attorney present, they wanted to dismiss, like they wanted it to be a law where that would, like, all of the evidence that was acquired would be dismissed. The guy shot somebody and said, hey, here's the gun, officer. If we didn't have his attorney present and we took the gun, like that would be inadmissible in court. That's crazy to me, right? That's crazy to me. And it doesn't make our city safe. So from the optic standpoint, in terms of, you know, how community members and people who have influence are able to kind of navigate that space, in order to be effective, I think you got to be aware first. And once you are aware, then what do you do with that? When we had the police department's budget here, talk about optics, when we had the police department's budget here, right? We had a line of people showed up and said, hey, look, cut the budget, cut the police, blah, 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 blah. Guess how many people we had lined up saying, no, that's a valuable service. I want it in my community. Matter of fact, we need to refund them instead of defunding them. How many people did we have in that camp? Not very many. But when the proximity of the pain shifts, the people say, hey, chief, what can I do there? I'm like, well, the budget hearing was 6 months ago. You know what I mean? So staying informed, man, and around the different things that people are passionate about. Again, when you talk about optics, staying in that space, just kind of, I have a level of awareness, and I want to help. I mean, I think people will receive it, and whether it's heavy on the law enforcement, wraparound services, or whatever, I think as long as that approach is balanced, people can appreciate the optics and the different lenses. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, Chief, and to my Rotary Club members, one of the reasons why I try to invite people like the chief is because I feel it's my obligation to let my club members know what's going on in the city, not just what's going on around the world, but what's taking place in our city. And I want people to know that. And then I also want to see, I don't remember you doing that before.
When I was at Homicide,
Yes,
I do remember that.
yes. And you said in my Homicide committee, task force. I want people to know that. And last thing I want to know, in the Rotary Club, that most of you all don't know, but we had a relationship with the police department. And with now the chief's current chief of staff, Marvin Hamer, we did a project. When I say we, I mean the Rotary Club did a project where we did focus groups with the young men and police officers in the district of Columbia. Because what I feel, and we feel, that's one of the important things we need to deal with. How do we get the public community and the police together? And we did that. Rotary Club did that long before the death of the murder of that guy. So we already had a relationship with that. But what I want to know, Chief, is in a comprehensive approach. I know I feel personally that we must have some type of initiative to be able to get police and community and youth to be able to get together and understand each other.
Yeah, so I'll answer that really quickly, and we can go to the next question. I want to try and get in as many as we can. We're actually, we're doing that. Even during the pandemic, one of the first things that I initiated was a series called Chat with the Chief. They were all virtual meetings just like this with people from all across all segments of our city on there from every ward. We had that facilitated by Howard University, by Dr. Muhammad, and it was an opportunity for us to engage with each other to talk about issues that impact our city. Most recently, as this past Saturday, we held our first youth summit where we brought young kids from all across our city together over at Eastern High School to talk about issues that directly impact them. what they want to see from law enforcement and what they don't want to see from law enforcement in their communities, in their schools, et cetera. So those things are happening, Mr. Barnes. We're certainly, I believe in engagement, and I think that in order to see the city that we want to be, we have to continue, have continuous engagement in those spaces. Thank you.
Chief, thank you for all you do. And I'm curious to know about the facilities that are available for homeless people. I mean, it would seem to me that the city's going to have adequate facilities to house these people, particularly when it's cold outside. I mean, why in the world, would a homeless person opt to stay outside when he can go indoors and be warm?
Great question. So what the city is doing, they just cleared a homeless encampment the other day over on New Jersey Avenue. The city is putting individuals up in hotels, quite frankly, across the city. They're putting them up in hotels to give them an option as they work to transition into more permanent housing. Believe it or not, there are a lot of individuals who are suffering from mental health issues. We had a woman just the other day. I mean, the issue was like, they called me like Chief, I mean, like, should we arrest? I'm like, no, we shouldn't. We got to work around that. But there are people who are just not at the point where they process this, right? Because it's like, I got all of everything that I own in the world, I have right here with me. I can't take all of that into a hotel room with me. So what happens to all of my stuff, right? We got people who are in that space. A lot of people will opt for the placement, but some people, unfortunately, sir, even in the most extreme weather conditions, they just choose not to go into alternative shelter.
Thank you once again, and we are out of time. Sorry. Really great talk. Thank you so much for coming. We have a tradition that each time we have a speaker, we present him with a tree, and you will plant a tree in your honor somewhere here in the city, and there's actually like a GPS situation where you can probably find your tree. Awesome. So we're giving you a certificate, and also we would like to make you an honorary member to our club. And here we have a pen, and we also we will have the certificate in the mail to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Here's your pen.
This is an honor. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I really appreciate it.
Awesome.